Well, we had a great time the last couple of weeks, I thought. I don't know whether everybody enjoyed it, but the idle spectator in the group certainly learned a lot from what we did together. I thought that I might just start things off. I don't have any particular project for today, except that I hope a lot of problems will come up. I'm into problems. Probably I'm more interested in problems than in answers and solutions and things. So I thought I would just sort of quickly remind us of what got talked about, partly just for kind of informational purposes. Pat is back among us today. He might be interested in the summaries, partly because I think it's always interesting when you've sweated blood and tears over an essay or a paper or a contribution of some kind, to discover that some person can brutally summarize it in a couple of sentences in such a way that you don't even recognize what you thought you were trying to say. But also because I thought a rather spooky coherence began to emerge, not in the sense of a solution to problems, but in the sense that we spend a lot of time circling around some issues, and I thought perhaps I could try. I don't normally do this, but I'm going to sort of try it as an experiment. Try to bring out a little bit the way in which I thought the various people's papers interacted with each other, at least from my own point of view and from my own perspective, and set me thinking about certain kinds of issues. So Jackie started us off with I thought very troubling, very courageous and very troubling exploration of the way the authority of pain, once it gets accepted, can be abused, can and is abused. I suppose one should say that's to say the way it's used to silence people. And as she pointed out, the way that most troubles me, I suppose, that's exactly what I had done in the class of mine that I described as depriving my students of the possibility of resisting. And all of that kind of thing. She spoke about her own experience, asked the question that I don't have an answer to, of why people have recourse to poetry, what it is about the kind of situation in which poetry seems the right response. So she raised the question of authority and the uses of authority, which I think turned out to be one of the keys to our discussions in general. Then the other thing that she did, which I didn't quite catch on to the importance of until I thought about it later on, was she circulated a document, her father's Polish certificate, I suppose it is, of having an Ausweis, whatever the Polish for Ausweis is, right? The consonants between Ausweis and Auschwitz is on everybody's, tends to. Anyway, his documentation that he had been a concentration camp prisoner under the Germans, but she pointed out to us that this Polish document didn't mention the fact that he'd been imprisoned by the Polish authorities before. So she was pointing out to us that you can't trust any kind of evidence. In fact, that there is a falsity inherent in the evidence, so to speak, even the most material looking document. And I thought to myself later on that what she did was point out to me, anyway, something that, to the extent that I've read writing by the survivors, by the children of survivors of the Shoah, something that perhaps is common to most of that writing, but is rarely put into words, and as Jackie put into words. That is to say, those two issues about authority, the way an unanswerable authority can be abused, and is abused, and the way children in particular are in the position of, children in general, I suppose, but survivors' children in particular in the position of having to negotiate that. And then the other issue of the fact that there isn't such a thing as an unanswerable authority. Authority is, by its very nature, so to speak, something that can always be negotiated, viewed as inauthentic. And then Stephanie connected to that. I'm not going to follow the chronological order, although I will more slightly follow the chronological order. Stephanie connected to that by raising the issue from the other side of how one connects with witnessing writing, and whether one can connect with Stephanie's metaphor, whether one can connect, in what sense one can connect with it, whether one genuinely can connect, and by raising the issue of the guilt entailed, she called it the feeling of rubbernecking, which I went away afterwards and thought, oh yes, Stephanie was talking about a special version of survivor guilt, not the survivor guilt that people like Charlotte Delbo carry around with them, but the survivor guilt of not being even a survivor in the sense that Charlotte Delbo is a survivor. What can we do? We can rubberneck, as she drew my attention anyway to some particularly interesting episodes which I hadn't seen the interest of until she pointed it out. The place in Mouse where, after having used masks, having shown us mice walking around with pigs' masks on when they were Jews, Polish Jews pretending to be Polish Catholics, comes the episode where young Art, that's to say the child, the son, and his shrink are talking together, and they are mice wearing mouse masks, right? Which I think is raises a great number of issues, and I was really grateful to have that pointed out for me. And then the other episode, well, not really the episode, the other reference that we need to bring in here is the way haunting occurs, both in the case of Pryor and in the case of Roy Cohn in Angels in America. So what's circulating in all of that is the question of authenticity, I suppose, which Nancy then proceeded to make explicit for us by looking at a quite fascinating text by Anna Novak, that's N-O-V-A-C, so it might be Novak or something in Hungarian, I'm not sure. You never get the diacritic marks that tell you. Who actually and miraculously kept a diary for several months in a number of concentration camps, and not only that, smuggled it out. Succeeded in smuggling it out and in tracking it down after at least a couple of years later. She was very ill. She had to recover from being ill before she even succeeded in tracking it down. And so Nancy raised the question of authenticity by comparing that on-the-spot writing of Anna Novak's, which is, I would say, largely satirical writing, astonishingly so. Here is a person, a 15-year-old girl in a concentration camp, who is largely writing satirically about her fellow inmates and their various forms of pettiness and aggression and jealousy and all of those kinds of things, and about the essays. And then Nancy compared that then implicitly with texts that are grounded much more in memory, and raised the issue of what she called the dilution into history that occurs. And I thought described it very tellingly at the moment when she said that Anna Novak has no answers when she's writing, and that even somebody like, let's say, Charlotte Delvaux is beginning to have some answers, even if the answers consist of doing the sort of things we're doing, describing the problem or analysing the problem. I would perhaps radicalise it even more and say that Anna Novak doesn't even have any questions. She doesn't know what the questions are, whereas people who've had the option of thinking about it for a while can at least come up with questions. Then Ian, on his side, led us into the complexities of authority in addiction narratives. Made that move of shifting away from Holocaust-oriented thinking to addiction narratives, and managed in about half an hour to sketch a whole history of the writing of addiction since Thomas de Quincey, and to do an implied reading of Trainspotting, and to raise several questions around the issue of the suspect narrator, which brings us back to the authority question right there. And the particular twist that I thought came out of his talk was, first of all, to show us that the suspect narrator is necessarily full of seductive tricks, tricks of manipulative and therefore seductive rhetorical tricks, quite devious stuff. I remember him talking about there being always a new place to find a vein, and I thought, wow, there's a metaphor that I can make use of. This is the room for manoeuvre person talking here. There's always room for manoeuvre. It means, in this case, there's always a new place to find a vein. But the paradox that I thought was very tricky and interesting was that he was, I think, showing us that the meretriciousness and the mendaciousness of the addict narrator is what's authentic about that narrative. Remember, he said, going right back to De Quincey, it's the opium talking, not the opium eater during the talking. So that the truth, if you understand truth in an absolute sense, the truth of the matter is subject to, I've forgotten your phrase in something like endless deferral or permanent, I think you said permanent deferral, something rather like that, which means that the truth is, sort of keep turning that thing on its head all the time. Very interesting and I think useful, helpful contribution from the point of view of that particular problem. Okay, then Dan came along and provided us with more weaponry in a way to, and the military metaphor is fairly apt, to deal with this issue of the authenticity and inauthenticity crutch by drawing our attention to the wit in witness, and in particular noting the prevalence of puns and wits, in the writing, some of the writing that we read, including the punning and etymologizing that we got up to ourselves. But I suppose I let out of the cage myself, and the people took up a certain amount of alacrity as time went on. Getting me thinking, with that awful teacherly thought, oh God, what have I done now? Kind of thing that goes with you to when if I ever get a grave and there is an epitaph on it, you can make that my epigraph. Oh God, what have I done now? Anyway, Dan was talking to us about verbal pointedness. Remember, we did the etymological thing, pointed out that pun comes from punctum, is the punctum, in other words, and pointed out that pointedness, sorry, this thing is catching Dan, is aggressive, that, ein Witz ist ein Blitz, as he said, quote, in Jean-Luc Nancy.
Quoting Novalis.
Oh, quoting Novalis. Okay. Yes, I'm quoting you, quoting Jean-Luc, quoting Novalis. Kind of, so Witz is the Witz is an element in the Blitzkrieg, in other words, so to speak, but there's an element of aggressiveness involved in this, and asking whether that element of aggressiveness isn't essential to witnessing as practice. So I found in my notes the following, part of which is me and part of which is Dan, I think. But the sentence I wrote down is, what can be learned from a prostitute and her prostitutery? I said to myself, while listening to him. In other words, taking the meretriciousness, the inauthenticity, the rhetoricity as being of the essence, and saying, okay, what can we learn from, how can we make that a form of tutoring, And indeed, I suppose I would play on the etymology there too, because a tutor is a support in the first, etymologically speaking, those springs, so we can talk about gardening. When you drive a stake into the ground next to your plant and provide it there to hold the plant up, that's called a tutor in technical English, and in regular everyday French, it's in tutor. Anyway, it's a tutor. So Leslie was left with the question of how to follow all of those acts, and she did it very interestingly indeed by coming in where we started, or coming back to where we started with the question of genre, and asking the question, is witnessing writing does it constitute a genre, and if so, what does that mean? What does it mean about the understanding of genre? And what does it mean about understanding witnessing? That if it is a genre, it has to be the genre of the writing that hijacks other genres, right? And so she asked that question, which again gets us into a kind of conundrum, it's the genre that's not the genre at the same time. And she asked some other very searching questions too. If it is a genre, does its genericity and therefore its conventionality conventionalize the object of witnessing? In other words, is the mechanism of the dilution into history, or part of that mechanism, is that genre? And finally, she asked, I think, the question that was the most troubling of all to me, which was, who reads this stuff anyway? Right? If it is a genre, for whom is it a genre? Which has got to be the question you always ask about genre, I think. Or at least it's not the question that most literary people... You remember I did my little rant, my little anti-Aristotelian rant last week. It's not the question that most literary people ask about genre, but it ought to be the question of a genre. For whom is it a genre? And who does it reach? Who does it fail to reach? Questions like that. Which, as I recall, we pushed away with our toes, saying this is too hard for us. Of course, it's the most threatening question that you can ask to literary people who take it for granted that if we are reading this stuff, everybody in the world must be reading this stuff, which is a very unlikely assumption, very unlikely consequence, to put it mildly, and raises, therefore, a lot of questions about our own historicity, what we think we are doing, why we are doing it, what is this discipline that we are investing so much of our energies in, why, what does it mean right now at the end of the 20th century? I would, if I may, sort of do a little mini paper of my own at this point, try to start things off anyway by way of a discussion, by saying, kind of segueing from what Leslie was saying, and saying, what does it mean to be studying in an institutional context, such as ours, and with disciplinary kinds of purposes? What does it mean to be studying a phenomenon that challenges all the categories, not just the category of genre, but all the categories that we have to work with? The category of literature, it both is literature and not literature, right? So in fact, that's its nature, is the nature of answering present to the question, the disciplinary question, and answering not present at the same time. Imagine, the Appellenplatz in Auschwitz, where actually I think they just counted people. In fact, they didn't even get to answer their numbers, but it was done by numbers, basically. The identity of people was numbers. Here is a discursive phenomenon that both belongs in the categories and at the same time eludes those categories. So, category of the literary, category of truth, I would say, is both true and not true. That's right. And therefore, all those related categories, category of fiction is both fiction and not fiction. Category of history is both history and not history. Category of documentary is both documentary and not documentary. Category of representation, it is both mimesis of a real and not mimesis of a real. Category of narrative, it's both, you can do narrative analyses and at the same time it upsets all your narrative analysis, and of course the category of genre that Leslie talked about. What does it mean to be working with that in a disciplinary context? Are we putting it in a straitjacket, trying to put it in a straitjacket so that we can talk about it? That may be one thing we're doing. Or do we need to, okay, here's another conundrum, invent the category of that which escapes categories? And if so, would that category be called writing, perhaps? Going from that to the tradition in French philosophy and French aesthetics, since about Mallarmé, of écriture as being that which is theorized as the mode in which language is used in such a way as to escape ideological straitjackets. Is that what we're doing? And if we're doing it, what are the disciplinary consequences of doing that? Are we doing something important in the discipline and to the discipline by that kind of study? Is that, if that's so, if this is writing that's really disturbing to the discipline, is that a reason why, rather astonishingly, there has been so little disciplinary attention paid to writing of this kind? We live in a century where there's a huge explosion of such writing, but and we live in a century when departments of English have enormous great menus of courses about a whole range of things. You rarely, fairly rarely, find courses of the kind that we've just been through, or of a similar kind. Although I was delighted when I went to Montreal last week to discover that they have a Holocaust reading group there, and that regular teachers, of course, also on witnessing. This is largely Holocaust witnessing, but also age witnessing. So, it's happening. What does it mean that it's happening? And so the last question would be, what is the conjuncture? What is it about now that means, particularly 50 years after, more than 50 years after the events of the Holocaust, that the institutions and the disciplines are just beginning to indirectly acknowledge that history. Is there a time lapse? Would we want to buy into a time lapse theory? Would we want to buy into an end of the millennium theory? Would we want to buy into a striking a nerve theory? So, these are problems as far as I'm concerned. The definition of the problem is I can't give you a very clear exposition of it. I don't want to give you a very clear exposition of it. So in a sense I'm not earning my money today at all. I'll take the check if it comes, just the same, but because I'm used to not earning my money. But I just wanted to sort of try and open things up a little bit by running through that. There's more, obviously. I could go on forever, as you know, but I'm going to try and stop now and take some notes while you talk to me.
Has it been in France? We noted before that the number of texts coming out of France, which came out of texts as AIDS testimony.
Yeah, interesting you should say that.
Yeah. So has that been absorbed into the academic faster?
Great question. I think not, unless you can't easily come. There may be a cultural, and therefore geographical, national cultural, and therefore geographical distance that's necessary. I could be wrong about that. That's something to look into, but I think in France it's been the work of, much more the work of the publishing industry and the media, maybe to a certain extent politicians.
These works?
The Delbo phenomenon is interesting, I think, in that her stuff there was a time lag before she could publish at all, before she could write, and then before she could publish. And then there was another time lag, and her writing has become much more, dare I use the word successful, commercially successful anyway. It has sold well. Only recently there's been a second wave phenomenon, and in that wave, much of the writing that happens straight after, or relatively soon after, Robert Antel and W. Housset and Jorge Semprún, people like that who largely came out of didn't come out of Auschwitz, they came largely out of Buchenwald, a place where political prisoners were sent, which were nearly as bad, but in fact not as horrible as Auschwitz. Most of the early writing was done by those kind of people, fairly largely in the context of Marxist thinking, Marxist philosophizing, I suppose. We're not talking vulgar Marxism exactly, but they were trying to understand the phenomena of Nazism and the concentration camps in particular in that light. So that in France for a very long time the phenomenon was always referred to as the deportation. It's only since a couple of movies with Chagrin Latifier and then Claude Lanzmann's Shoah that they suddenly realised that the phenomenon of the deportation, which was kind of understood as political business, but that you couldn't actually put the suffering, you couldn't put the phenomenon of the deportation of Jews and the concentration camping of Jews just under the general bland heading of the deportation. That began to happen about in the 70s, I suppose, and is only now really coming prominent. But in answer to your question, I don't think it's reached the educational institutions. I'm sure they don't have the high school courses.
My guess, in terms of academic, in terms of the educational, and why it might be starting now, it's just a guess. It has to do with interdisciplinary studies, because in a sense this is problematic. This is a question, like where does it fit in this public? So maybe in these kind of comparative disciplines, culture, literature, interdisciplinary, that kind of these kind of studies, or openness to that in different disciplines, kind of windows.
That's very interesting.
And this that's gaining popularity. Although I say that, knowing that a lot of these pop open, like these start up in campuses and then shut down really quickly.
Yeah.
Like in Montreal, McGill, the Comparative Literature is closed, as far as I know.
Yeah, there's something happened to comparative
Yeah, I don't know
literature
what happened
at
there.
McGill, yeah. And also at the, while we're exchanging Montreal gossip, something happened to it at the University of Montreal.
What? Really?
Well, it hasn't been closed down, but they lost steam somehow or other. Yeah, maybe that was an unfair comment.
What might fit into that too is level of increased tolerance of history type studies. Not spread yet, but there, yeah, right. But there is a little bit more room for questioning the very basis for your question. But it's over binaries, truthful or true, history, not history, not. All I could think of was our little table, modernist, binary, postmodern.
Yeah.
Not binary,
Yeah.
right? And there we go. There's another binary opposition already.
Yeah.
But the very fact that we do keep questioning back
Yeah.
leads us to accept this kind of
Yeah. Yeah. To quibble a little bit, in using the negative forms, neither truth nor not truth. I was trying to signal difference rather than binarization, but your point holds up all too well. Just the same. Go ahead.
Just curious to scaffolding is problematic and all that. But by looking at the text, what is literature? What is it? This is a means of what these forms are, what they are. If there's a problem of what is literature genre, does that say about what this genre should be advertised?
Yeah, we can't exactly throw
What is
them out.
literature then?
At least it's impossible at the moment to envisage throwing them out, getting rid of the category of literature. Well, it might come to
You think of this,
it's not helpful to us any longer.
It's better for I have a lot of these smuggling this type of writing into. Or on the other hand, phone questions. Like what are we smuggling? Maybe set up these nice categories. Well,
That's right.
This is approved. This is okay. So the stamp, custom stamp, which is approvable. This is not being smuggled. This is marketing. This is free trade. And then we have smuggling, but in the sense of once you start thinking about smuggling, then I just started thinking, by really looking at this,
Right.
That's the whole thing.
I'm actually thinking about two things. First of all, a friend of mine about 5 years ago suggested to social and political thought at York that she do a thesis on AIDS literature. And they were extremely skeptical, even a very interdisciplinary department like that, because it's literature. They didn't know how to sort of work with these narratives in that context. But then I was thinking too about Ian's presentation on Trainspotting and the fact that Trainspotting has become wildly popular and as you said, was the most stolen both in Toronto. And so, I think at some level institutions do acknowledge this. There's an interest in this kind of work. But at the same time though, when I think about something like that, my first thinking is, okay, well what other books would you put with that, and how would you try to sell this? Because I just have this sense that the universities are stuck in this 19th century.
But the curious thing is, I think changes have been happening all the time. I'm going to use what everybody thinks of as the world's most conservative department ever, and that's English. Undergraduate program. First year core course is a course on narrative. It teaches everything from Freud's case histories to films to, it doesn't respect any of the literature categories anymore. I think that these changes have been happening, and one has an idea, a monolithic idea of what the discipline still is. But I think it's been worn away, and I think in most places we wouldn't recognize literature, capital L, the way we have constructed it. I really think the reality is changing. I've been totally shocked when I actually looked at the program, since I too had constructed it. I come from this university. Oh, that's interesting. And I have no sense of that. So, my sense is though that there really has been a real contamination, erosion, I don't know what metaphor you want to use, but it's happened, and it's happened over time, and without big, I think if you did make a big ideological statement, you get everybody defending the discipline as it used to be. So, but it's happened.
So what you're saying is that, for example, texts like this will get taught, and maybe not necessarily in a course that's called AIDS literature or Holocaust literature.
But it could easily be. There's a slot, a fourth-year seminar slot, which I could see, which changes from year to year.
Right.
I could see that. And I don't think it's good for you. The kind of things on my graduate course, which has to be approved by the entire graduate faculty. And the first time I did it, I thought, oh, shit, I'm going to offer this. And all you think, they're going to treat me. Nobody said no. Because I think it just says that they're going to accept it. I just think it's their usual crazy stuff. But I do think that there has been, without making big ideological statements, and that's the curious tension, that we aren't willing, it seems, to make that kind of statement because we have a lot invested in the discipline. And yet,
do anything you want to the discipline, but still change the name of it.
that's what
So that's a very interesting non-Foucaultian definition of what a discipline is. See the difference between the discipline. I think Yotar has some interesting stuff about this somewhere or other. The difference between a discipline and a science would be what they're doing and have ways of legitimating work and therefore of delegitimating work that doesn't measure up. While a discipline is something that has a historical evolution covered by like the history of cricket, okay, or football if it comes to that, all of these major sports, which have had very different manifestations through the last 150 years. I mean, in cricket, they used to bowl underarm. You guys know about cricket?
Oh, we still do that? We never threw them.
Yeah,
Like,
you do.
They do? Oh, okay. I don't know. I don't.
And the problem was that bowling underarm, pitching underarm, I suppose I could say to the North American was too lobby and it made it too easy to hit the ball. And so they invented this kind of strictly governed form of overarm, which just transformed the game of cricket. I mean, all of a sudden it became quite dangerous to play cricket and very hard. But it was still called cricket, and nobody really knows any longer that it was ever. And similarly, gridiron football was, at the turn of the century, was a running game, much closer to rugby than it is now. And Yale, I think, they invented a strategy of play which consisted of forming a phalanx of players who kind of guarded the guy in the middle who carried the ball, and they would charge down the field, sort of leaving wounded people behind them. And after about 10 or 15 years of this, the powers that be scratched their head and said, gee, this is not exactly sporting any longer. And so they introduced a forward pass rule, which is unthinkable in rugby, for example, And after another generation, all of a sudden it was a forward pass. It was a passing game as well as a running game, and again totally different, but still called. So maybe that's the understanding of disciplinarity that we should be working
I
on.
mean, we even in the last, I was just thinking, in so many different levels, we just watched the disciplines change. I mean, if you had told me 25 years ago that you could do a thesis in theory in English, because I was trying to do it, laughed you out of the room. And yet now it's kind of accepted. And it happened without redefining the discipline particularly. But it happened gradually by people, entering in. And here is one example, but I think the interdisciplinarity, there have been courses for a long time, for example, in which in autobiography and biography, witnessing is just, it would not be hard, I think, to do a course of witnessing, even in that time. So, I just think the definitions have really changed gradually. And I think your sports analogies are great.
Thank you. I always feel so macho when I come up with an anecdote about the history of team sports. I'm just beginning to make a list here of names that we have, that I think we might have, have already cropped up. The idea of minor in the Deleuze sense is worth going back to that book of his. It's a bit forgotten now, I think. Pour une littérature mineure, it's called in French and in English, much the same, something like that in English book. Towards minor literature. Very interesting book, but a bit thin, and so it was sort of blown out of the water by the Anti-Oedipus and the Thousand Plateaus, and well, it might be worth going back to see what he says about minor stages. And I just wrote out women because males are always exploiting women for one purpose or another, and but you know, in the academy, fairly clearly, much of the sort of phenomena we're talking about really came out of the women's studies, revolution, feminist, various feminisms.
Where there's a large baggy monster in which there might be some useful pockets or subdivisions or distinctions to be drawn. I mean, just taking the works we've been looking at as constituting a genre for the sake of argument, one might want, at least I might want in my notoriously taxonomic fashion, to inquire which distinctions among the materials we've been looking at would be of any use in collecting our thoughts. I mean, the first implied distinction is that between the various age situations which have brought forth this sort of literature. I mean, how is age literature inevitably and distinctly different from Holocaust literature, and how different would the atomic bomb literature from Hiroshima and Nagasaki be if we had at the time or the inclination to consider that as well. And then another distinction which seemed to me to come to the fore in almost in almost every book is when is the witness also the central sufferer. And as I recollected, in most of our texts the witness was the central sufferer, but in one or two, like the Hoffman text, the witness was something much more like what the word witness suggests, which is somebody less directly involved, if involved at all, involved at one remove, as Hoffman was. And that there might be an enormous difference between the formal properties of a witness from the side and the formal properties of a witness from the center. And most of our witnesses were central witnesses, which I think might make some sort of distinction.
Taxonomy,
and then the other one that occurred to me that I mentioned to you earlier was in terms of this set of books, the French books and the English books. And what I found myself noticing was how very stylized, how very consciously literary the French books were. I mean, you could sit around and think about the Paranomasia and the images all day, and you had nothing better to do.
And we did. Having nothing better to do.
Whereas the English books, on the whole, rather equally consciously rejected the option of being stylized. They said, you know, this is such raw experience that we're going to give you the raw, descriptive, documentary, factual hand on the doorknob version of it, and you know, let those folks be stylized if they want to be. That's literature, not witnessing. Well, I mean, those were the distinctions that puzzled me as we went along, but I think there might be any number of others if one somehow gets past the question of the genre as a whole and just assumes its existence and gets down to the differentials.
I have to say that both of those issues have puzzled me for several years now. But Leslie, you might want to say something else, because something like that came up in your talk. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Oh, how weird. Yes, I'm sorry. It's like thinking time's up when it isn't up yet. Oh. No, I mean, you don't have to. I just wanted to make an opening for you, because it did come up while you were, in your talk. On the one hand, you can't subdivide infinitely, because the whole point of the idea of genre is to account for the fact of, is to find the interface between the individual text and the readability of that text, right? So you can't subdivide to a point where everything, in a Crocean kind of way, where everything is absolutely particular. At least I'm assuming you can't. Croce obviously assumed the opposite. But at the same time, this point where a given genre is so unhomogeneous. I mean, all genres are not homogeneous. No genre is actually homogeneous, obviously, At least I'm assuming that's an axiom. But you reach a point where your genre has become so non-homogeneous, not to say heterogeneous, that you've constructed something that's too big to be of any use. Also, and the issue is a little bit about what the in-between is.
If you're too silent, it stops. So I see it not turning closer.
The classical concept of genre, and you start getting things that can be compared only to themselves or to the work of that particular author, and you start talking about a genre that's le roman standardien. And again, that's perhaps subdividing below useful levels.
Yeah, we obviously have to, start thinking about categories, both the usefulness of categories and the limits of categorization in new ways. I think, again, there's a segue into my anti-Aristotelian pitch. I'm not careful, but it's about what you can do with genres and why you can do it.
Well, getting back to what we were talking about in the university now, and a difference possibly in this genre, though, what you mentioned before was representation. And in a way, this is one of the few courses I've had in this university, and I did my undergrad and my MA here too, that unabashedly still talks about representation, representing something that happened. This novel, this poem, this film is about something. And that's different, no? Any comments on that? Because many of the courses you're in, they're saying, no, it's the text doesn't mean anything beyond the text, don't look beyond that, blah, 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 etc. Throw that in. The death of the author.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, the return of Nuisance, yeah. I don't want to forget the other point that Pat made about national cultures, because I've been puzzled for a long time about why that issue hasn't arisen among us. I'm glad that it has. I think there's a whole can of worms here that know how to deal with. I myself struggling when I was in Montreal because I needed the concept of a can of worms a lot when it came to the question and answer.
You speaking French?
Part of the session. Need you ask, It's such a non-Gallic. If you have to talk about national cultures here. You can't talk about a can of worms in a Cartesian language, or in a Cartesian culture. It was very scary indeed. I suddenly felt that there was no place for me around here. But anyway, getting back to this particular can. Something that I think is on one hand obvious, and I apologize for mentioning, on the other hand is rarely discussed, is the fact that language, natural languages, are both referential by nature and in terms of motive semiosis. That the way natural languages as a system of science signify is through referentiality. It's very hard to use a language in such a way. You can do it by various tricks of the trade, but it's very hard to use language in such a way as it doesn't refer. Right? And that's a big challenge to do. Whereas if you're talking about another sort of semiotic, the traffic lights, right, on the corner, it's quite hard to describe the way in which traffic lights do refer. You can say that they're about certain forms of urban civilization, policing, those things. No, but it's not obvious that traffic lights as a semiotic system are a referential system. Whereas the first thing that you've got to notice about language is that it has referentiality. And that the way it signifies is that. So that means, I think, that representation is a two-way street in that you don't get, okay, here's the T-shirt, no mimesis without semiosis, right? And equally no, I guess it's mimesis, right, without semiosis. Equally no semiosis without mimesis. Now, for some historical kind of reason, in the discipline, we have tended to go from one side of that particular paradox to his conundrum to the other side of that particular conundrum, being able to deal with what ought to be a rather simple fact, which is that referentiality is a mode of signifying. And that mode of signifying is very, very good. But you've got to deal, it's like the enunciation thing, which is something I was delighted to have to talk about in French without having to explain what it means. But it's the same thing. Necte cum nec sine te, right? Don't get the one without the other. Jamais l'une sans l'autre, so to speak. L'une sans. They're always kind of the same, but to cover it, we have to find a way of talking about these complexities in ways that recognize the complexities that are. And that particular complexity, now that I think about it, was at the heart of my way of summarizing what went on in the last couple of weeks. Differentiality semiosis is perhaps the issue that we were all in different ways. Mimesis, semiosis has been two different forms of linguistic semiotic production was what we were talking about. And the fact that what we're witnessing right here, that rub our noses in that particular problematic, is probably both indicative of why that becomes an interesting topic at this particular moment, and also why we find it so hard to deal with. History hasn't helped us to have reason.
In binary, is it metaphor and autonomy? The rhetorical terms which somewhat changed meaning under his hands, from which David Lodge deduced that English literature was always oscillating between the metaphorical and the metonymic. But I was wondering if perhaps the French weren't writing metaphorical witnessing narratives and the English writing metonymic ones, or the Anglophone.
Yeah.
I just throw that in because David Lodge reminded me so much.
David Lodge courses. Is there interest in talking about these questions of national? I mean, we're a bunch of comparatists. We're apologies. Yeah. On the whole, we're a bunch of comparatists with a token criminologists among us to remind us that the world is not made of comparativism. And we haven't done any. Comparativism is about nationalism. I think it's true to say that the axiom of comparative literature is that there are national that literature is all one on the one hand, but two, somehow there are national traditions of the literary. And I don't think anybody's ever disinterred that particular set of axioms, looked at it, tried to see how one thing goes together. But anyway, that's comparison has to be constructed in some way on the idea of comparison being possible, while differences nevertheless occur. And we went through 11 or 12 weeks there without accepting the private conversation between Pat and me, that issue arising. And incidentally, it arose more as a matter of language differences than a national context.
We're trying to look at it on a much smaller scale, at least
Yeah,
to
me
start
too.
with,
Yeah.
and say this batch of books, this batch of books.
Yeah. Yeah.
Both batches doing witnessing, but not doing it in quite the same verbal way.
Yeah.
Except that if you want to bring genre in, the genres have different, and want to hijack genres, genres have different meanings in different national cultures.
Yeah.
So even talking batch of books, you open that can of worms,
Yeah.
don't you?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah. Yeah, in the French national
Many worlds.
culture, I think perhaps the reason why I've noticed kind of this stylistic glitz of French writing, autobiography is still, I think, in spite of the example of Rousseau, deeply involved with questions of pudeur, pudicity, about your private self to other people without turning their stomach, so to speak. Bourgeois French culture, not in working class French national culture, but in the bougie culture, which tends to be mistaken for the culture. I think that's an issue that scarcely arises in the Anglo traditions that I
Because if I'm right, I think I'm right, the only culture, this is operatic stuff, but where you could not show a death on stage.
Yeah.
And the first stage death in opera in Paris was in 1837, which is pretty late. And it's Le Siège de Corinthe by Racine. And the first woman to die on stage, if I'm not mistaken, was Carmen in 1875. And people were shocked at the Opéra Comique. Maybe it was just at the Opéra Comique. The woman had died.
It's violent, yeah.
But she was the first woman to die at the Opéra Comique on stage. So you didn't show that because it was a kind of place, the Opéra Comique was kind of place where the bourgeois came with their families for a family gathering kind of thing. So that's the thing. The pudeur about death probably is...
It's about, of course, the amazing hegemony of what the French call their classical aesthetic, lasted about 20 years. We thought, it's still with us, I mean, historically, it was flourishing for about 20 years, between 1660 and 1680, roughly. Better referred to as neoclassical or even late Baroque or something, But whatever it was, it still exerts extraordinary influence on the nature of taste. And that's very much about, remember klassische Denkform, it was that household. Man's name used to be household. Anyway, toning it down, euphemism. It's also about stylization. So, mimesis without semiosis, without stylization as well. It's sort of a very middle-classy, educated person.
Who was so immensely skillful at stylizing these obscene revelations about the murkiness of his nature.
Yeah.
He looked at both ways.
But he was, and so he was also in a way the ancestor of this kind of writing, which is also, I think, very skillful at stepping up the murky in good writing, acceptability. To an extent, taking perhaps hint, talking about this bunch of books and that bunch of books, I think you have to take into account here the sense in which so many of these books are written out of a gay culture, gay male culture, and therefore the sense in which gay male culture doesn't respond to national analysis, but through a local, exists along the local global, much more modern way, post-national kind of way, along a local global kind of axis, the sense in which, in the West anyway, so far, but you can also see it happening in Asia now. To deviate me in a direction I hadn't intended to go. The sense in which there is an international, translinguistic, international culture very much tied up with the spread of the global spread of capitalism, I think. Brutally frank about it. That's called gayness, or whatever it's called. evolved since 1969, the little Stonewall event in New York. I was going to write something interesting on the board. Combined with quite remarkable local differences. Local both in the sense of regional and in the sense of class differences, gender differences, of course, cleavages of that sort, having to do with the relation to what I called gatekeeping institutions and all of those kinds of things, and having relatively little to do, however, in both of those cases, both in the case of the globalization and the localization, having very little to do with national, the illusion of there being a national culture, because it is always an illusion, and that's why I was led to talk about bourgeois France rather than France. I think that's an element to take into fairly considerable account in dealing with these texts. And the other troubling aspect of it is, from my point of view, finding an interface between my definition of culture as being analyzable in relation to interactions, and therefore my definition of culture as being the array of genres that are relevant to a given interaction, which of course fragments the notion of culture almost to infinity, in the sense that it means that any given how do you define an interaction? Any given interaction has its own culture, which I think has a certain ring of truth about it. Finding a way of reconciling that with the fact that even this kind of edging writing has to be written to some extent for a culturally undefined audience, right? But nevertheless envisageable kind of audience. You can see texts that are working very hard to define the kind of ideal reader that they want to meet. Eric Michaels's belief that the Sydney intelligentsia was his prime audience. All the shilly-shallying in Pascal Duduve about whether his audience was represented by the other passengers on the ship, or whether it wasn't possible to define another kind of audience that would be more appropriate, sympathetic, congenial, and all of those kinds of things. There's that. Well, Duduve is very, very central here, because of his shilly-shallying. He's shilly-shallying between defining an ideal audience, which would be E, the transformation of E, and at the same time publishing a volume which I think during his lifetime was already in the Livre de Poche, and therefore, the kind of thing that you find in airports and railroad stations, or in the smallest villages in France. You go into the local Maison de la Presse, and you have the Livre de Poche, right? So his books, and his books found a much more general readership than anything that he probably imagined. So, how do I theoretically manipulate my understanding of the culture of a text so as to take account of the desire to of the difference between kind of an authorial speculation or an authorial projection of its readership, and therefore the culture of its text, and then the actual culture in which the text gets read. I don't know quite how to do that. Yet another candastico, boitastico.
Is there possible attic narrative? I mean, you've got on one hand, you've got the tradition of the confessional narrative, the Rousseauian type of thing. But you've also got, I mean, and this ties in with something, you've got that whole Baudelairean tradition of flaneur sort of moving around. And I was thinking of the genre of travel writing. I know this might seem bizarre, but I mean,
right.
but this whole idea of the traveler, of the travel, I mean, there's also this tradition of a number of traditions, sort of slumming it, you know, so that, okay, there's the one thing of the sort of slumming it. You go in and you're the flaneur and you look around and you observe this, you experience and you witness, almost like at a remove, as opposed to that sort of directly involved, romantic, subjective kind of confessional witnessing. We've also got sort of the figurative travel diary. I mean, everything sort of referring back to the Divine Commons, the journey through hell, or even the mythological journey, and you see that repeated constantly. And what has also made me think of this is when I look at, I didn't have time to squeeze this into my half hour. When I look at the addict writer, like there's a whole tradition of sort of this addict or intoxicant travel writing, where you're going to, you know, different, and it's sort of both figurative and literal. So, and even if you look at Hemingway, if you look at Malcolm Lowry, you could even argue De Quincey was more of the romantic confessional tradition. Even then, it's sort of like, it is a trip, you know, the whole idea of the trip, the Grateful Dead, what a long, strange trip it's been. But there's a definite tradition of this sort of travel writing, but in many respects, I mean, it doesn't seem to be a connection. On the other hand, some of this witnessing and then how it might relate to a genre, and also to its either its national or transnational nature. Could there be? I think, because of course Cargo V is really a travel account.
Which links up with Frenchness and gayness. I mean, authors like Bowles and Burroughs, addicted travelers of a gay disposition, and also in that smallish category of American writers very seriously influenced by the French.
Yeah.
Overlapping at least.
Yeah. Very interesting idea. Both of those ideas I want to run with. I want to clutch them to me and run away with them and think about them and come back next week.
That's very true, because they once you get started, there's always going to be there's parallax on the road, that whole tradition of being on the road.
Yeah. I don't know whether this is relevant or not, but it's astounding to me. Okay, this is stuff we haven't read, but there's a lot of United States writing by gay men. Most of it in the aftermath style. They're financially well off. Who is ill. Take a trip. Paul Burnett is the clearest example of this with his Greek thing. I don't know whether you've read Borrowed Time. But Borrowed Time, on the one hand, it's very, kind of liberal arts college education 101, in a sense. His major, it starts off with an epigraph from Pindar, and he uses all the way through the concept of the army of lovers and the companions. In particular, the Pindar quotation is about the role of the poet and the role of the hero, and the relation between the two. And he also uses the notion of the companion who binds the hero's wounds, all that stuff. So this is his metaphor for writing about the death of Roger. But actual travel to Greece is part of the diegetic structure of that novel. It's written into the plot, so to speak. So these were the high moments in their life when these two took off to. Now there's that. There's geography of the what's that title? It's on the handout that I gave you if I can find it. Okay, so there's geography of the whatever it is, and while I'm looking,
Geography of the heart.
Lines of Tuscany.
About taking
Yeah,
with one guy.
there you go. Yeah. What, geography of the heart. That's the one. Yeah. In which the couple also take a trip, and the guy actually dies. Goes very close to dying. They're doing the Chateau de la Loire, right? And he has to be brought back to the American hospital at the last minute, so to speak, to his time. So there's the use of the actual metaphor of geography. And then there's David Wojnarowicz, Close to the Knives, which we didn't talk about either, which is a kind of an on-the-road style of writing. It's all about, well, it's on the street and then it's on the road. And what you're saying just is giving me a sense of how you might not only link all those kinds of texts, but also approach this kind of writing from the point of view yes, the depth is
I mean, just look at that.
can't get away from it. Yeah.
Show a number of titles.
What else is there?
Cabins Cove. Or is it to London Bridge? Geography of the heart.
Yeah.
Just all of
Yeah.
these sort of metaphors of going somewhere.
Yeah.
The spatialization of time.
Yes, very much. Yeah.
I think there might be another trope here, chiasmic English, because when you're looking...
Chiasmus, I think.
Chiasmus?
Yeah.
Bon, d'accord. I get very French when I sound like chiasm, I don't know why. Anyway, when you're talking normally about margins, right, being on the margin, whatever, the other is you. When you're traveling, the other is them.
Yeah.
So there's a switch that happens when you start talking about travel
traveling,
literature.
when you say the other is them, is that the same thing as saying the other is you, or?
Well, I'm trying to look at the other instead of being me suffering from AIDS in this society. I am the other for society. Once I'm traveling, I am the center, and everyone I'm looking at is the other. I'm doing 16th century travel literature right now. And all these others whom I'm describing become the curiosity, the anecdote.
Yeah.
And I'm the center. I'll throw that out.
But it works the other way around as well. And of course it links very much with the marginal situation of gay people, infected people, particularly people infected with a stigmatizing disease, migration. We haven't even talked about migration here, but I'm thinking of actually at the moment reading an oral history of San Francisco in the AIDS era, starting with the Dan White riots, taking us up to about 1965 or so, 1995 or so, I'm sorry, reading about one of the people in this history here is a man, his name is there's three badges. One of them says, I have a big dick. The other one says, I'm illegal, and the other one says, I'm positive. Gay, illegal immigrant, Mexican. And I tell you, these are all ways of being, there are lots of different ways of being other, okay? And it's always reversible. The people who are othering you are the people that you are inclined to other back, so to speak. That's I think that's what I understood by the chiasmic fairly, because I was so busy thinking about that I didn't necessarily hear what you were.
It appears to become, we read these, readers may read these as travel narratives.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like, this is an exotic experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're trying to go out with your thoughts and whether it be gas, because you have downstairs, that's the rubber.
Yeah. Yeah, do you want to talk a bit about that, Stephanie? When Ian first introduced the idea, I was thinking of rubbernecking. And then we went off in another direction. Yeah. It raises, it's an interesting way to contextualise what you were saying last week, and it might make your essay project undoable in a way, because it kind of expands it but the trick is always to write in the possible expansion while nevertheless retaining enough focus for everybody not to get crazy.
That whole idea could also scare people away from reading it, I think. The idea of concentrating on genre and concentrating basically on the topic as a genre, AIDS literature, as opposed to witnessing and things like this. I think in going back to national literatures, I think many national literatures would be pretty much resistant to that, saying, let's wait until it gets canonized and it is one of the greats in our literature. And I'm thinking of a professor who had bounced this off of our wonderful Italian department and said, well, let's wait till that stuff settles down a little bit.
Bounce it right back to you.
And I'll see what we can read.
Yeah.
What is readable. It hasn't been gone, not enough of it has been knocked off. We don't have enough greats yet. And until that happens, he won't waste his time. Intelligent, men.
Won't waste his time.
But that was the conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think that's not so much his inability to approach us. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he's in an Italian setting, where things just have to be engraved in Dante stone, or it's just not going to be right. And
also
so
a Mediterranean kind of setting where the unmentionable is very unmentionable.
Yes. And so if it already gets, AIDS literature becomes the title, I guess, for the genre, then it almost shuts it off in quite a few national literatures, I think.
You might talk to him about a fairly well-known novelist called Tondelli, Vittorio Tondelli. His last novel is called Coming to the... doesn't use the word age. That's what you want to do. We haven't had a break. It's, if I'm reading the clock right upside down or in reverse, it's past getting on 35 If we take a break, that'll really be the end. I want to mention a book to you that I discovered in Montreal, because I think it's right up there with Dante, really. It's a masterpiece of Canadian writing, Anglo-Canadian writing, Ontario Canadian.
Toronto Canadian. Come on.
The author's name is anything but Anglo. It's Jan. Anybody? He's very young. He's 30s now, and he must be in his late 20s. M-A-R-T, yes, it's a French-looking name. And it's called The Fact Behind the Helsinki. He's great on the title. It's a Canadian Knopf, not Knopf, but Canadian Knopf. And it's 1993, so it's been around for a while. What this book is 4 short stories or novellas. The first one is called and one reason I mentioned it to you is that it kind of encapsulates some of the issues, particularly the genre issues that we've been talking about, and the witnessing issues. They're all fictions. They're not autobiographical. They're fictional. One of these fictions has AIDS as its This is topic, the first one, this one. The second, the title of which is, I need to get it right, that means I have to remember where I wrote it down. Okay. The time I heard the private Donald J. Rankin string concerto with one discordant violin, comma, by the American composer John Morton. All right, got that? The title is nearly as long as the. It's a tremendously good and interesting piece of writing, and it's about Vietnam. And the next one, less interesting, but has a straightforward title. It's called Manners of Dying. Is about capital punishment and execution. The last one is called The Mirror Machine, and it's about memory. You'd think it doesn't fit with the others because it's not about an atrocity. What it is about memory in relation to identity. The Mirror Machine is a machine for making mirrors, but one of the main ingredients of mirrors is memories. So you buy yourself a mirror machine, and it has a little mouthpiece, and you put in some sand and some silver stuff, and through the mouthpiece you talk memories. A lot of this novella consists of blah 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 blah, an old woman's memories, which she's recording as she makes a mirror. So the idea is the relation between memory and identity, all of that stuff. Very complex, much more complexly developed. All that. But of course, when you begin to think about it, closely related to these witnessing kind of topics. So there's, in a single volume, in a way, some of those questions of genre encapsulated. It's brilliant writing. It really, I think, contradicts what we were saying about the difference between French writing and English writing in many ways. Very inventive, very witty, brilliant use of punchlines in final paragraphs that just leaves you going, I see. And it sort of brings together many of these kind of issues. The Age story is about two guys, allegedly straight according to the fiction, one of whom, aged 19, is dying of AIDS. His friend, who is in that helper role, they run out of things to talk about. They've been friends at school, Trent University, Peterborough's. So they've done the undergraduate thing and discussed the nature of life and done all the big questions. What are they going to talk about? While the younger of the two dies. So the other guy comes up with the idea, let's tell a story every day, alternatingly. And the convention they adopt is that each story that they tell will relate to 1 year in the history of the 20th century, starting in the year 1901. And it won't be the story of the historical event that's particularly characteristic of the year, but the story will be an allegory. The story about this Italian family that's supposed to have migrated to Helsinki and lived a life, of several generations in the last 100 years in Helsinki. The story will be an allegory. It doesn't say allegory, but the story will therefore be an allegory of the historical events. So most of the narrative is about the horrible history of the 20th century thrown together with a case history of the death by AIDS. Active symbolism, right, thrown together. There's a lot of detail that I could get into, but I think that's just very central to what we're talking about. What we've been sort of moving around here, the relation between the facts behind the Helsinki Rockamadeus. What is the name for those facts? Historical pain, perhaps, or personal pain, atrocity, theocracy. We can make another list of names there, but that's what that title is signaling to us. Look for what's behind the story. So, fascinating stuff.
Canadian author virtually unknown in
Yeah,
Canada.
a great Canadian author, published in Toronto. At least I think Canada, not Canada, is Toronto. And like RSVP, locally undervalued. Put it mildly. So run out and steal a copy. And make it the second most stolen.
And then pass it on to a friend.
They pass it on to a friend. Yeah. No, I think it's brilliant. I really do think it's both brilliant stuff and tremendously important and significant writing in the sort of perspective that we've been talking about. So I'll come back to Toronto. If I do come back to Toronto in the fall, I think I want to talk about the movie, Longtime Companion, in connection with some French writing by a guy called Guillaume Distant, which I've also just discovered. Has two short novels, one of which is called Dans ma chambre, and the other is called, obviously, Je sors ce soir, which I think, again, is quite astonishing writing in the farewell symphony kind of mode. If you're following up on Pat's hints, if you talk about the page writing as the autobiography of the dying on the one hand, aftermath writing where somebody is writing the other story and the two stories are combined. On the second hand, and then on the third hand, it's a narrative of a group, undergoing the trauma of frequent interruption, frequent disappearances, and so on. This is writing about a group that I think is particularly interesting because everything is matter of fact. It wasn't the matter of factness of the narrative until you realise how the horribleness of what's being described. Ouch. Writing. It's written in slang. Incidentally, in the up-to-date 1996 slang of the Marais, ghetto slang. So, I had the pleasure of going back to when I was age 19 and trying to learn to read French for the first time, struggling through Le Rouge et le Noir with, blanks on every page with words that I'd never seen before, But brilliant stuff. So that's just to keep you up to date on what's been happening since last week. The Nomad.
Papers due.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. Papers are due to me August 15th. Aphrodite wants grades, which I don't know anything about, incidentally. Do you get grades or do you get appreciations or what do you get? Letter grades, ABC?
Well, actually, A plus A minus, B plus, sort of.
Okay, right.
B plus
That's
basically
that's the North American.
sort of a C.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
we had this bizarre, we figured that
Sure.
graduate students, if you had to have an A plus, A minus average to get into the program, therefore that's the only grading.
I know. That's all right. It's nice that it's been officialized. However, in the States we're more hypocritical about it, but basically it's not a problem. In fact, it's very clear in this group that the range of grades will be very tiny and that they won't be F or G, I'm promising you that right now. Yeah, G's good. G's good, F's are fantastic. So, yes, please get me your essays by the 15th of August, or alternatively let me know that I shouldn't expect them so that I can cheat with the system. And you can... the phone number, first of all, area code 734. When I gave it to you in January, I may have said 313, but that, of course, changed to zip code, whatever it's called. Area code since then. 9952685. If you lose it, just call Directory Inquiries. I've had that number for the last 20 years. It's got to be available. So remember, area code 724. And the address, I'll give you my home address.
Now, each have to send it away individually.
You're allowed to fantasize that that's the street named after Valkyrie, you mean, but it's not clear that that's what the developer had in mind. The developer baptised the streets in my neighbourhood. Hanover. What else? Now, no email. I have to apologise for that, although I don't feel sad about it at all. You can't email me, but I don't plan to move very far away from Ann Arbor during the summer and to get some practice the piano a lot. So you should be able to catch me at home. There's a voicemail system which is a bit scary, but does answer the phone, so you can always leave a message. What else practical do we need to cover? What else is there? So Aphrodite wants them at the end of August. I need time to read your stuff. August. Well, I said the 15th, so that means the 14th for you, right? Put it this way, if you're not going to get it to me by August 14th, 15th, please get me something or other so that I know what to expect.
I have a grade called incomplete, so if people need extended time, standing defer this.
The incompletes get you into all sorts of trouble. I would rather cheat with the grading system. The worst comes to the worst. But I didn't, if anybody asked me if I said that, of course I will deny it.